It began with a cousin pulling me aside at a wedding, glass of wine in one hand, awkward sympathy in the other. "I heard about what you're going through," she said gently. "If there's anything I can do," I blinked. "Going through?" "You know," she leaned in, "with your condition." That was the first I heard of my supposed mental decline. If you've ever been accused of breaking down just so someone else could rise above you, like, share and subscribe, because this isn't about instability. It's about strategy. My brother, Malcolm, had always been the golden son, the successful one, the one who made money early, spoke in measured tones, and held our father's attention like a brand.
Me?
I stayed close to home, took care of Mom after her first fall, drove her to appointments, laughed with Dad when he forgot small things. But apparently, that made me fragile. At least that's how Malcolm framed it, to our extended family, our parents' estate lawyer, and eventually, to our parents themselves. He said I was emotional, overwhelmed, unstable. He wasn't cruel about it, not openly. No. Malcolm's weapon of choice was pity. He pitted me so loudly and so often that people started to believe him. He convinced them I shouldn't be executor, that Dad should revise the will so the pressure wouldn't fall on me. What he really meant was he wanted control of the accounts, the land, the valuables.
And it worked.
But while he was gaslighting me into irrelevance, I was keeping a file. And inside it was a clause our father had signed, one Malcolm never knew about. A clause that made me the final key holder the moment they both passed. Our father had been sharp once, razor-edged with money, meticulous with contracts, even in retirement. But Malcolm banked on his forgetfulness. He figured if he fed enough doubt into the room, Dad would hand over control like a confused old man tossing keys into the wrong pocket. He was half right. Dad did start to forget things. But one thing he remembered clearly was the betrayal. You see, people who lie for power never consider the long memory of the quiet ones they try to erase. The clause came from a meeting Dad and I had 2 years before he died. A quiet Sunday.
No eternis.
Just us and a notary. Dad wanted to balance the books, he said, in case things went south. He added an amendment to the will. A clause that stated, should any named heir be found to have intentionally misled or manipulated either parent with regard to their mental or physical health for the purpose of altering the estate's terms, said heir would be disinherited and financially responsible for funeral expenses and probate costs. Dad wasn't paranoid. He was just careful. And I kept that document sealed, signed, notarized. Malcolm had no idea. He moved assets early, got Dad to put the house in a joint account, whispered that I wasn't ready for long-term responsibility, told our mom I needed rest. And I let him, because power obtained through deceit always blooms in silence until it's time to cut it at the root. The funeral was modest, not because we couldn't afford more, but because he would be footing the bill. Malcolm didn't know that yet. He sat at the front row in his tailored black suit, the same one he wore when he spoke at business luncheons and charity fundraisers. The tears in his eyes were probably genuine, but I knew they weren't for our parents. They were for the control he thought he had locked down. The will reading happened 3 days later in a mahogany-paneled office with worn carpet and the scent of dust and ink. Malcolm sat tall, confident, his fingers interlaced like he was preparing for a congratulatory nod. Then the attorney opened the file.
And read the clause.
The room went silent. The words were like glass, sharp, clear, and impossible to take back. Malcolm's face went pale. He looked at me like I'd murdered him with a sentence. The attorney continued. Per the amended will, all remaining liquid assets, personal property, and land holdings were to be transferred solely to me. Malcolm had forfeited all claims due to behavior determined by the clause. The clause that was legally triggered once Mom's nurse submitted testimony of his manipulation, and once I submitted the notarized document our father had signed 2 years earlier. It was ironclad, legally binding, and irreversible. Malcolm tried to interrupt, called it hearsay, slander, even elder abuse by reverse proxy. But the lawyer only smiled, tapped the last page of the will, and said, "You'll find a breakdown of your new role on page 14. As executor for funeral costs and probate fees, those invoices are now in your name." He stood at the podium that day, throat dry, voice too steady. He had written a speech, you could tell, the kind with polished phrases and carefully orchestrated grief. It was the kind of performance that might have worked in front of investors or donors, or even the cousins who still thought Malcolm was the responsible one. But he didn't finish. Halfway through the second paragraph, his phone vibrated. It was a message from the funeral director. The final invoice due now, with late fees climbing. He faltered,
Stuttered.
looked out at the crowd, and blinked like the sun had suddenly turned on him. And I swear to you, he saw me in that pew and realized I wasn't crying. I was watching. He had taken my voice. Now I had taken his foundation, and the cracks were echoing off the sanctuary walls. The eulogy stumbled to an awkward end, a few lines about legacy, something vague about family strength. But there was no applause, no nods of pride, just silence, because by now word had spread. The will, the disinheritance, the costs. He hadn't just lost the estate. He now owed nearly $18,000 in funeral services, burial permits, probate processing, and transport fees, personally. The family that once listened to him with admiration now whispered, wondered. Why had he been left with nothing but debt? Why had I, the unstable one, been trusted with everything? Because I was never unstable, just patient. The estate closed quietly.
No appeals.
No courtroom drama, just silence and paperwork, filed and notarized, while Malcolm swallowed the cost of his own manipulation. I didn't gloat. I didn't call him. I didn't answer the brief email he sent, just 3 lines of half-apology wrapped in self-pity. I thought I was protecting the family. You went too far. But I didn't go far. I went exactly as far as he pushed me. While he curated his image as the rational one, the hero son, the responsible guardian, I was bathing Mom, managing Dad's pills, coordinating hospice, paying out of pocket when he forgot his wallet on medical errands. He convinced others I was unfit. But what he didn't count on was that the unfit one was keeping records. The clause that ruined him wasn't cruel. It was justice written in legal ink. Witnessed, signed, and filed by a man who remembered, who actually showed up.
Now?
Malcolm rents a small place outside the city. Lost the house he planned to claim. Can't refinance the condo because of the funeral debt still hanging over his credit. And I stayed in the family home. I restored the garden. Hung a framed copy of the will in the hallway, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that when someone tries to write you off as crazy, you don't argue. You outlast them. And then you let the paperwork speak for you. Thank you for listening. Like, share, and subscribe for more true feeling stories where betrayal isn't answered with anger, but with legal signatures they never saw coming.